SSCA Easier and Safer Cruising Summit. Tricks, tips, techniques, and solutions to problems. All of us have them. Special ways we have found to make our SSCA cruising life easier and safer. Don't be surprised to hear what seems like contradictory opinions. We purposefully have individual conversations with each speaker or couple so they do not hear what others are saying. They are not arguing with or biased by someone else's opinion. In cruising, as in life, there is no one solution for everyone. So we hope listeners realize these are personal opinions based on individual experience, and they will form their own judgment for their own situation. Welcome to episode 8 of the Easier and Safer Cruising Summit. One of the most asked questions of people actually out here cruising is, aren't you worried about being robbed or attacked by pirates? That's a pretty big subject, so find out the statistical chances of being attacked on your own boat. Discover what some cruisers decided about carrying firearms aboard, and learn what was the most common outcome of suspicious encounters. Our short subject for this episode is having AIS aboard, and our practical tip is choosing a dinghy for a budget cruiser. We end with inspiration from one of our members on the question of, did cruising meet your expectations? Are you worried about safety and security for yourself and your boat as you travel to different areas of the world? We spoke with 20 different SSCA members on this subject, some recently and some during the Circumnavigators Summit, where this was a specific topic. We took excerpts from those conversations. The areas of conversation fell into 5 categories, 3 of which we will cover in this episode. 1. Avoid known hot areas. 2. Should you carry firearms aboard? 3. False alarm stories. We start off the conversation with Jimmy Cornell, and he will tell us what he discovered from his research about this security issue.
Working on one of my books, and I decided to find out exactly what is the actual likelihood of someone on a boat being attacked or at least robbed. So I looked at the various incidents around the world, some of them published on non-site, some were published by an organization in the Caribbean, and I came to a total of about 200 reported cases of theft, and I would say out of the 200, maybe between 3 and 5, there was actually a violent robbery involved. Then I extrapolated the number of boats that are cruising the oceans of the world. They're probably on a long voyage, not just sailing in the Bahamas or between the Caribbean and Europe. And there's probably, I estimate, maybe 10,000 boats that are involved in a long voyage at any one moment. And I arrived at the point that you actually, the likelihood of you being the victim of a robbery and or a more a violent robbery is 0.5%, meaning it's 1 in 200. Well, I wish anyone could say that that is the case if you live in Los Angeles or even here in London, not to speak about places like Singapore or I don't know, I don't want necessarily to say that Singapore is a dangerous place. But wherever you travel, you are much more likely to be encountering maybe an incidence of theft or even being attacked than on your own boat. So stop worrying, just do it.
Okay, great advice, Jimmy. I think piracy and fear of theft and that sort of thing kind of equates with the idea of worrying about shark attacks when you go scuba diving. It's something that would be horrible to think about if it happened, but the actual possibility that it could happen is very, 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 very slight. So just like avoiding the bad part of town on land, many of our cruisers avoided the likelihood of becoming a victim by avoiding known hotspot areas. Listen to these members.
Basic approach was to stay away from dangerous places. We used local knowledge, government travel advisories, Noonsite, and several other websites to find out where there was piracy on the seas or high crime rates at the landfalls. We did our best to avoid these locations. The closest we got to known pirate zones was when we sailed on the Singapore and Malacca Straits, and also when we just passed the Sunda Strait going north, the area around Jakarta was very bad. Also when we sailed from Thailand to Sri Lanka, we stayed clear of the Nicobar Islands because of the piracy. And of course, obviously, the Horn of South Africa. So we basically just stayed away from those areas. We also secured the boat when we were at anchor or in a marina in high theft areas like Madagascar, Mozambique, and South Africa. We chained our crucial on-deck equipment onto the boat, such as Joyful's dinghy, the dinghy engine, on-deck jerry cans of diesel and water, etc.
How did you deal with security, and did you have any issues?
So we were aware of it too. I guess the number one point is you choose a route that doesn't take you to the real known hotspots, which are, at the time we did it, which was East Africa and the approaches to Suez, or quite a lot of the North Indian Ocean, in fact, and also Venezuela and that part of the Caribbean. There are other parts of the Caribbean that are tricky. Some Caribbean islands have a bad reputation. At the time we were there, St. Vincent, we just simply didn't go there at all. Since then, St. Lucia's had some problems. Parts of the Far East can have issues. We, apart from choosing our route in that way and paying attention to Noonsite, which is a very good resource of thinking about things like this, we really didn't worry much about it after that. Our precautions were minimal in that we do not lock the cabin at night. We do not have a grid or guard on it, which some people do. We occasionally lock the dinghy to a pontoon when we're leaving it, the wire that anybody who was a serious thief could take out in no time. And we didn't have any weapons. I read a lot online about people talking about whether they should take guns or several guns or mace or pepper spray and stuff. Being British, we aren't allowed guns. We don't think in terms of guns. My husband is an ex-infantry officer, so he's more than capable of using a gun. But it just didn't arise for us. We never, ever had any problems. We were never frightened of any approaching boats. We just never saw it. And we never felt worried by anything we did see. So I think the security fears are slightly overblown. As long as you don't go to the wrong parts of the world in the first place. Nothing you could give me would persuade me to go to the Horn of Africa and go up through Suez, Somalia's a crisis zone, the Yemen's in flames, Egypt's pretty messy. There are still people who want to finish their circumnavigation by going through Suez because it's a bit shorter, and I think they're out of their minds. But apart from that, it was not a worry for us, it really wasn't, and I don't think people should be put off by worries about security. Much more likely to be robbed at gunpoint on the streets of some of your own countries than you are when sailing.
I just don't go there. I mean, as soon as I read that there has been, a robbery on an island or in a port, I just don't go there. That's it. I just avoid it. I just go, whether it's nice people smiling, bula bula or whatever, and keep smiling around.
We never had an encounter with piracy. We kept our ear to the ground and our eye to what you could read, and we basically stayed away from areas that were known to be a little more dicey. For example, Venezuela used to be a nice cruising area. We never went there. The southern Philippines, when we were in that part of the world, were not a safe place to go. We chose not to go through the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea. We wanted to see South Africa anyway, but regardless, we would not have gone through the Red Sea at the time we were there. So the first thing we did was just pay attention to what parts of the world are a little more dicey. And we didn't get that from any single source. We would read what the U.S. State Department said, but we'd also keep our ear to the ground with other cruisers and what people were experiencing. That network is very rich with information. So that's essentially what we did as a foundation for security. We were robbed twice in the 16 years we were out. Neither time were we on the boat. Once was in Mexico during the Easter holiday festivities. We were on someone else's boat having sundowners, and some people just opportunistically went down the starboard side of our boat and took everything that was loose off of it, and I guess they needed it more than we did. The other time was when we were in Cartagena. We left the boat in a boatyard on the Hard, and when we came back, we discovered that it had been robbed. Someone had gotten inside it and had stolen everything loose, and so that turned out to be a security guard at the boatyard. But other than that, we didn't really have any issues. We weren't particularly paranoid. I didn't have an easy way to lock us inside the boat, so most nights we never even locked the boat up when we were at anchor. And essentially, we didn't live our life paranoid because we found people around the world to be genuinely nice and welcoming and honest.
Having a firearm aboard is quite a controversial subject among cruisers. Each one of us has to evaluate very carefully your own comfort level and decide for yourself if carrying a firearm is right for you. Listen to these cruisers and what decisions they made.
I had this discussion with various people. We, for ourselves, come up with the philosophy that if we were to have a firearm on board, we would be more likely to go to an area that our subconscious or even our conscious mind is saying we should stay away from. And we feel it's the same way when you're walking around town. If you're carrying a firearm, you're going to have a tendency not to shy away from areas that you maybe should stay away from. So that's our philosophy. So we don't carry a firearm. And we definitely notice that when we're thinking of going someplace that maybe we shouldn't, we don't go.
I believe that if you have a firearm, you're going to get shot, sooner or later. So I don't carry firearms. I actually don't believe in arms altogether. I'm a pacifist.
And as the one issue that people do raise is firearms, and after a lot of consideration and discussion with other circumnavigators and weapons experts, we chose not to bring firearms with us on board. For weapons, we carry 2 flare guns, emergency flares, and scuba knives.
Before I left the United States, a person gave me a pistol because they said you're going to the Caribbean, and there was at that time in the 90s a lot of drug smuggling in the Caribbean. So they gave me a pistol, and then when I was in Fiji, another friend was shipping their boat back to the United States, and so what they did was they said, well, when you check out Fiji, here's another receipt, get it and you'll get another pistol. So I actually had 2 pistols with me, but I never needed them or used them. By the way, when I sailed into Israel, I was asked by the guards at the marina in Tel Aviv if I had any guns on board. And because I wanted to leave Israel and fly to the United States and visit my parents, who one of them was ill at that time, I was asked, if, again, as I said, if I had any guns on board. And I said, yes, I did. And because I felt they was an honest country and they would take them and give them back. But the man at the border, at the marina, just said to me very simply, he said, don't worry about the guns. He said, we have more.
Okay, that's an interesting story.
If you do carry a firearm, also often they'll let you keep it on board if you put it in a sealed locker. And I'll just segue into the firearm discussion. Between the time I was at summer camp at about 9 years old and the time I went sailing, I never fired a gun. I shot a .22 rifle at summer camp. Other than that, I never owned a gun in my life. And when I went out cruising the first year or so, I didn't carry a firearm. But the next year, I decided there were a few more of these instances of guys coming on board in the Caribbean. And I thought if I couldn't protect my wife, I would never forgive myself. So, total non-gun person, I went and I bought a firearm. The next year, we were back in the States. I got a little bit of training. I went to the target range and shot it a few times. My wife shot it a few times. And we proceeded to carry a firearm for the next 15 years. Checked in and out of maybe 60 countries. Every now and then we go to a shooting range and practice, so we weren't total novices. But we carried it everywhere. Gratefully, we never used it. If you want to do that, don't be put off by the people who tell you it's a giant hassle. It was, out of 17 years of cruising, it maybe was a hassle 2 or 3 times, where it added an hour to our clearing in or clearing out. So it was not a big deal almost anywhere. We cleared in and out of 60 or 70 countries with it. And if you want to carry a firearm and you're good with them, don't be talked out of it if it's going to give you some peace of mind. I will say, if I ever had to use it, the next thing I would do would be to pull anchor without clearing out and get out of whatever country I was in and not trust myself to the local legal system. However, I always wondered, am I going to shoot some 15-year-old kid who's swimming out here to my boat with a machete to steal $20? And so what we also had was pepper spray, which we carried which we had not only on the boat, but we often carried it in town in places that were not safe, like, say, Cologne, Panama, or somewhere. But we also had a taser on board. And the taser that I had was a very old style. It looked more like a flashlight than anything else. Mm-hmm. And that was gave me a huge amount of comfort, because if somebody came onto my boat, I could shoot first and ask questions later with the taser, and I wasn't going to kill anybody. And I slept with it next to my bed, whereas I never would have felt comfortable sleeping with the firearm under my pillow. The firearm was always in a locker that would take a little bit to get to. But the taser was right next to the bed. I could have it in my hand if people approached us during the day. It wouldn't look like intimidating to them, but if something happened, I had it in my hand. So that's what we carried, and that gave us a lot of peace of mind. Gratefully, we never had to use any of those things.
One thing I want to add is that if you do carry a firearm, you need to show some kind of permit. I bought my firearm legally in Florida, but didn't get any paperwork for it. So I went online and found a New York State permit application, and just printed it out. And I went to an office supply store and got a big red stamp, rubber stamp that said approved, and I made my own fake permit, but I used that all around the world to show that the gun was registered. And you do need something like that.
At one point in the midst of the Caribbean, we became so concerned with security that we purchased a shotgun in Pensacola and had it shipped on the airplane with us. We took it apart and put it into various pieces in our luggage and brought it with us back to Venezuela on an airplane. We actually cleared it through customs in Venezuela. The customs people in Venezuela didn't even look at it. We acknowledged that we had it, even though it was in pieces. We still acknowledged that we had it, and they didn't even look at it.
When we were on Footloose and we were in Venezuela, we left the boat there and came home for a month, and that's when the coup happened. That was, I guess that was about 2002 or 3, I guess maybe. And we left the boat, and so we got home and we were telling friends about it. Everybody was like, you got to get a gun, you got to get a gun. So we went to Walmart and bought a gun and took it out and shot it a few times and then took it back to Venezuela. And luckily, there were no problems as far as getting back to the boat and getting on the boat and getting out of Venezuela, because we were, everybody was encouraging us to leave. So we did. We did have that gun on the boat when that big cigarette boat approached us. It was hidden on the boat, but Ron told me to go down and get it and not to come up unless he called me. So we knew we had the gun, but we probably would have shot ourselves in the foot. But and then we did transfer that gun over to Miss Jody, and we took it with us on half of our circumnavigation, not even half. We took it as far as New Zealand, and each country you go in, you have to claim what you have, and then you have to surrender it, and then you have to get it back when you're ready to leave that country. So we just decided we're going to tell them they can keep that gun in New Zealand, because we knew, we didn't want to hassle with it, and we knew we wouldn't be able to use it.
Be careful with carrying guns, and people that say that that's a good idea, because it will really cause you a problem in third world countries. If you come into one country, at one end of the country, and it's a country that wants to take your weapon off your boat, then you've got to figure out a way to get back to wherever you checked in, and you may be several hundred miles downwind when you finally leave the country. The other issue is that some of the officials are not all that honest, and you may very well lose that weapon. So if that's what you're counting on to defend yourself with, it can be a real problem.
Most countries outside the U.S. require you to declare any weapons you have on board when you check in. And some of those countries will want to take your weapons and your bullets and take them ashore and lock them up until you leave. And so if you aren't planning on leaving from the port that you came into, then you have a problem with how to get your weapon back. And at least in one case, we left the weapon behind after we'd been cruising for a number of years and realized that, in those situations, if you didn't declare the weapon when you checked in and then you used it, you would be in severe violation of the law. And even if you didn't kill somebody, you could get arrested and thrown in jail in a place you really didn't want to be in jail. So, yeah, that was in the Caribbean. We checked in with the customs in Bonaire and gave up our shotgun and never picked it up again. When we left, we just told them they could keep it. That was a long time ago. Anyway,
Guns, the problem with guns and any firearm, whether it be a pistol or a rifle, is that it's a difficult situation cruising with a gun overseas. It's not like being in the U.S. where every American has guns.
But overseas, if you kill someone, regardless of whether it's their fault or your fault or they're on the boat stealing or whatever, it's a big problem because you're the foreigner, you're considered at fault until you prove yourself innocent. And first thing that'll happen if somebody dies is the police will arrive and they will take you and the body and you go into town and you probably end up in some jail that you're not going to like. Probably the best thing to do is if you kill someone overseas is to leave immediately. But you can prevent that if you don't carry a weapon that is capable of killing someone.
So many of the stories that cruisers have about being approached or followed by threatening-looking local boats end up to be just a friendly fisherman wanting to sell or give away fish, or someone asking for food or cigarettes or something harmless. Sometimes it could just be a misinterpretation of the actions of the local people, which could only just be superstition on their part. So, listen to our next group of cruisers and some of the stories they had to tell about non-issue stories.
We never worried about too much in Venezuela. The one time we were worried, we were the only cruising boat anchored in a bay with a whole bunch of fishermen, and there were, it was really scary being around them. And one day I had just dropped Dee off on a little tiny islet to pick some mussels, and just as I did that, I was in the dinghy floating next to the little islet. I couldn't land there, and the fishing boat came around the corner, and they came right for us. And I couldn't really leave Dee there, but I moved off in my dinghy, and they altered course and came right at me in the dinghy. And I moved again, and they altered course and came right at me again in the dinghy. And I was getting pretty nervous, and they came right up to me, and just as they got right next to me, the guy in the bow leans down behind the gunwale, and I don't see what he's doing, and he came up with 2 big fish and threw them into my dinghy. So that was my first experience with pirates, and that was generally how it usually goes. Although I will say, when we sailed up the South China Sea from Langkawi and up to Thailand and all that by ourselves, not really with other boats, and we never felt threatened. So I don't know whether it was wise or not, but we didn't ever feel threatened.
Most of the problems that we had were in the Caribbean, but we spent so much time in the Caribbean, it's not fair to say that, because we heard people in the Med say, you don't want to go to the Caribbean, it's too dangerous. We had lots of incidents where we had small boats approach us, and we would see the boat, and it would have 2 or 3 young men in it, usually. And, of course, you can't help but feel apprehensive. And for the most part, when they got close enough to us, all they wanted was a beer or cigarettes or gasoline. Usually they would have fish to trade. We debated when we left Pensacola, we did not have a weapon on the boat, and we had debated because neither one of us were comfortable with that. We knew that if we had a weapon, we would have to shoot somebody before we would be able to have them explain what they wanted. So we just chose to trust in human nature, and as it turned out, we were very, always pleasantly surprised once the encounter was over, but apprehensive in the beginning.
When we were on the way from the Andaman Islands direction Ado Atoll, we were passing about 50-60 miles south of Sri Lanka, Ceylon. And when approaching the southern tip of Sri Lanka, I was on watch. It was second half of the night, and I could always see a light appearing. Here and there, it just appeared, disappeared, and I did not like the general idea of that. I switched off my navigation lights and kept a very sharp lookout. And then morning hours came, and with the first light I could see a boat approaching at high speed from about 45 degrees on our starboard bow, and we had the Jenny boomed out to starboard, so we were rather immobile. The boat swung around parallel to us. In the meantime, I had woken up Almut, also to bring our pepper spray, long distance in the right pocket for both of us, short distance left pocket, and we waited, and that chap was very close on our starboard side, reduced speed, same speed as us, and we didn't know what was going to happen. Then suddenly one of the guys went to the foredeck, opened the hatch, disappeared for a while, came up and showed 2 large fish. And then we knew, hell, they want to sell fish. And then we started to discuss back and forth, and they asked, do you have beer? I said, no, we don't have beer, but we see what we can do. And I threw a line, a very long line, to the other boat, so that we could operate back and forth. And first they sent us not 1 fish as we asked for, but 2. And then Almut.
And then I was so happy that they were not pirates, they were just fishermen. I gave them our last beer. I put them into a bag. We didn't have a lot. We didn't have many. And I added some biscuits and some small money, some coins, and we sent it over to them. So they were quite happy at the moment, and then they disappeared. They drove away again.
When we went up through the straits between Sumatra and Malaysia, we heard all kinds of stories about piracy. And we'd heard these stories for years before we got there. And when we get there and we're talking to the locals and stuff and learn the customs from the local fishermen, they have some pretty interesting ideas, and they're very superstitious people, and when they leave the dock to go fishing, they set off a whole string of fireworks, firecrackers off the front of their boat. I'm sure you guys have witnessed it a number of times being there.
Yes.
And the purpose of that is to scare away the demons. And if they're out fishing for 2 or 3 days and they haven't caught anything, they still have demons. And they say, well, how can we get rid of the demons? So what they do is they find another boat, and they charge that other boat as fast as they can, right on, almost in as a broadside. And then they turn just before they hit it. And the demon can't turn as fast as they can, so the demon goes over the other boat. Therefore, you have a whole bunch of people reporting an incident like that as piracy when there was no piracy. We never actually had that experience ourselves, but we heard it from a few other people. And the only time that the hair got up on the back of my neck, we were out in the Indian Ocean, and there was a guy come up pretty close, and I had a strategy that I'm not sure I should share. I kept in the cockpit, in the locker, I kept 3 bottles of gas. These bottles, I scored them with a glass cutter and filled them with gas and corked them.
Okay.
And my strategy was, if somebody got close enough that they were a threat, I would throw that bottle of gas, and I kept 3 of them on there in case I missed the first time. And I could throw that on their boat, and it would hopefully break when it hit.
Right.
And then I'd have my flare gun out there.
Yeah.
And as a mariner, your biggest fear in the world is fire.
Right.
Well, as soon as they smell that that gasoline, if they got any brains in the world, they'll veer away.
Right.
I never had to deploy that, but I was ready to one time. And the guy come up and he held up a big fish and said, cigarettes. Lots of stories out there, and you got to take them with a grain of salt.
Right. So we see that probably 99% of the time our fears are unfounded about pirates or robbery. Most encounters are harmless people. For this episode, that is the end of the security issue subjects, and next week we'll cover 2 more subjects: non-lethal defense strategies and actual incidents that cruisers had and what their outcomes were. So join us for the next episode where we'll continue this conversation. Okay, and now we move on to the short subject for this issue, and that is the subject of AIS. Since AIS became widely available to cruising yachtsmen, it has taken away a lot of the stress and worry of doing night passages in high traffic areas. Most of our members find that having AIS is a real blessing, but like all technologies, we have to realize they are only tools, and nothing replaces watchkeeping and real vigilance. So let's listen to what some of our members had to say regarding AIS.
AIS came out after we were 2/3 of the way around the world, and I thought it was pretty much the greatest thing since sliced bread. I can't imagine having it available and not using it. It's made life so much easier. I mean, when we would be on passage before AIS, you're looking at a ship miles away from you, trying to figure out the relative bearing through binoculars. You're moving, he's moving, and you end up watching him until he's too close, and then you have to jibe or tack or something. Whereas with AIS, you know exactly where he's going to be in relationship to you. You go hit +1 on the autopilot, and now it tells you you're going to pass comfortably past him. And you wait till you're past him, and you hit -1 on the autopilot, and your blood pressure never goes up. I can't imagine why you would not invest in a receiver and a transmitter. It just makes life so much easier. When we sailed to Singapore Harbor pre-AIS, I remember having, not Singapore Harbor, but the channel crossing from Malaysia to Singapore. Excuse me, the channel crossing from Indonesia to Singapore was pre-AIS for us. I remember having 16 moving targets on my radar and trying to figure out the closest point of approach and which one I was going to go in front of or behind or whatever for 16 moving targets in about a 5-mile area. And AIS just makes it a piece of cake. I don't know why you would not have it.
I had a transponder which was either on or off, so I could not put it on receive only. But I never felt that was a problem. There could be occasions where you would prefer not to be seen in areas which might be considered dangerous, but I would just rather not go there, rather than having to switch the transmitter off. I love it. I absolutely love it. I went to Gibraltar twice, and both times it just happened to be either just after sunset or where you couldn't really see very well, and having the AIS is just incredible. You can see all these ships going in all sorts of direction, in and out of Gibraltar or across from Spain to Morocco. So it's just a zigzag of boats, and ferries and ships, going from 10 to 25 or knots or more. So yeah, yes, I feel very, very much safer with the AIS and turned on. And a few times at night time when I was, far away somewhere, and I see somebody on the AIS, I call them and I say, good evening or good night or whatever it is. Can you see me on your AIS? And it is reassuring when whoever answers the other end say, yes, I have seen you, I kept an eye on you, and have a good watch.
Do you think having a receiver only is okay?
Yes, it's better than nothing. But if there is a cruise ship, you want them to see you, because you can see a cruise ship even without an AIS, because it's all lit up. Most ships you can see them anyway. I think you want to be seen, and you want them to know that you're a sailing boat, and they have to give you way. Most times they can't see the sails, but if you have a sailing boat and you're transmitting that you are a sailing boat under sail, they have to give you way, and most of them do. And I love that. I see them turning away, giving a bit of berth. I would never rely totally on the AIS or on the plotter. I found myself that there's been a situation where the plotter says you're okay, and then you look out and you can see the bottom. So, visual, there is nothing, when you're in areas where there is danger, especially, you cannot not be on watch.
Even with all the wonderful things of electronics, there's nothing to beat looking outside and looking at the real situation, rather than I can see how sometimes it's easy to get lured into thinking that what you see on a screen is what the reality is. You see the boat moving on the screen, you see these boats going back and forth on the screen, and we get lulled into thinking that that's really only what's going on. But there are some little fishing boats maybe that don't have an AIS or anything to be seen.
Exactly. Then of course, there is the ones without an AIS or without an AIS broken, or that are not transmitting. So if they're not transmitting, you don't see them, do you?
Right, exactly. Well, do you think AIS is a blessing or a hazard?
I got in contact with AIS about 12, 13 years ago in Australia. I was invited to an Australian boat, and there he showed me his AIS receiver. He called it a poor man's radar. And I had a look at that thing, and immediately I thought, well, that is a perfect thing to have. I bought one, installed it, and I used it ever since. The great advantage of it is, of course, it doesn't use a lot of electricity, not like the radar, and you can let it run all the time. That is, of course, a good thing. Going further back, when in Indonesia, we had our Jenny boomed out, and on that receiver, I really could see that the freighter approaching me was on collision course. And I had his name, and I called him up on VHF, and he did not reply. And I called him up again, he did not reply, and we had to take evasive action. So it is already there. I did not have a very good feeling. But later on, when we approached Europe, I realized that many yachts in the meantime were equipped with transceivers. Of course, every chandlery will prefer to sell you a transceiver than a receiver, because they make more profit out of it. It's quite obvious. But was listening on my VHF and could hear many times coastal stations and big ships calling yachts by name, and they would not answer. And then I thought, well, that is a nice thing to learn now. And again, a few years later, it was, I think it was 2018 in Agadir. I was there already. A large Agadir, Morocco. A large French catamaran came in, and it was brand new. And I talked to that owner. We chatted a little bit, and he tried to convince me what a wonderful boat he had, etc. And then he was not talking. He was more nearly singing about his AIS, how wonderful that was. And then I said, look here, personally I do not consider this necessary, because it keeps you from your VHF watch. He says, on my boat we keep VHF watch all the time. Well, we left Agadir, Rabat, that was not Agadir, that was Rabat. We left Rabat and went out a little bit further than necessary, and trying to get wind, and slowly we moved down. And then, I think it was already during the first night, but doesn't matter, I could see an echo on my receiver, and it was that French boat. It approached, of course, at a much higher speed, and he was under motor. And I called him. I thought, well, let's chat a little bit. And
He didn't answer.
No reply. I don't know how many hours it took from about 12 miles astern, somewhat inland from us, until about 12 miles ahead of us. During my watch, I don't know how many times I called him. Then Almut relieved me. She called him. Never any answer. Then we got to Agadir, and he was there. So I said hello to him, and then I said, well, why did you not answer? He says, well, not answer. We keep radio watch all the time. I said, no. During such and such a time period, you did not answer. I was calling you, and Almut was calling you. No answer. Let me see. Oh, yes. My wife was on watch, and she doesn't like to listen to the radio. So that is the negative thing. Now, I'm absolutely happy with my receiver. We have had most wonderful experiences. You see a vessel approaching at night, no danger, and you call him and you start to chat, and those on watch, they also like to talk a little bit when there is absolutely nothing around. And there was a container, a bulk carrier approaching. Actually, he came out of the thick rain, and we had him on that screen, of course. And then when we talked to him, he said, well, do you have enough? First of all, how many people are on board? We said, just 2. What? You are operating with just 2 people? Yes. And then he said, do you have enough food? Do you have enough water? They wanted to stop and supply water and food. So the initiative came from us, because we don't transmit with the AIS. We just transmit on VHF. So that is the positive thing. So personally, and I think that is what we are trying to ask now. And you said at the beginning, do you consider it as an important tool? I say the receiver, yes, absolutely. And the transceiver, from my point of view, is not necessary on a small boat. it can even be dangerous as described. While talking to people, I realized that even lookout is not so important anymore because one relies on the AIS. People even said, oh, that was great. I was coming along and a large ship had to keep out of my way. I would not be proud to say a large ship had to keep out of the way only because one is relying on AIS. I would have talked to that man and keep a proper radio watch and also a lookout. More I can't say.
I just make two little devil's advocate points of view. One agreeing with you is that AIS can make people pretty lazy and doing the night watch, and what they may do is only regard the chart plotter or their chart navigation and seeing the little icons of boats that are having AIS signals. And thinking, okay, that guy, that's a green, so no worry about him. That guy's yellow, that guy's green, and we don't have to worry until we see a red signal. But one thing you do have to worry about is those little guys that don't have an AIS. So you still have to keep a watch out. If you were in the Philippines, those little fishermen, they don't have AIS. They don't even have lights. And you only see them, if you're keeping a good watch, you only see them if they light their little flashlight and shine it at you just about 50 yards away before you might run into them. And in Indonesia, some of them even like take the opportunity to get clipped by a yacht so that they can go and claim some money from the yacht. So it's a good idea to not just rely on the AIS and keep a good watch out.
That is really another good reason. Yes, basically, human being is likes to be comfortable, is more or less lazy, as you say, and that gives you a wrong. What I can say, a wrong security. They can see me. Everybody can see me. But it's not true. It's not true. Not everybody has a receiver. Not everybody is keeping even proper lights. You have to look out. And things like that, and that's why I consider it can be a hazard. I do not say it is a hazard. I say it can be a hazard because not all, but some people get careless and careless in keeping a lookout and keeping a radio watch. Many people were asking us, did you keep channel 16 on all the time? Yes, we were listening to channel 16 always. Most of the time there is nothing, as you know yourself, absolutely nothing. And once, when approaching the east coast of Africa, South Africa, we heard a call on 16. It was from a Frenchman who had only VHF, and he was trying to assist another Frenchman who had capsized.
Oof.
And we heard him immediately and were able to make a relay on HF. Now, you don't expect to find a radio signal in those areas, so some people just switch them off. We did not. We find keeping radio watches just as important as a good lookout, and not just stay inside the cabin all the time and look at the instruments.
Okay, very good point and a good story to illustrate that point. So thanks very much, Eddie, for your contribution and your ideas about AIS and also keeping watches.
Well, you know that I'm a little bit old-fashioned, but we have sailed so many miles, well, on this boat since '88, and not have had an accident, touch wood. So not everybody can claim that.
Choosing what dinghy is right for your cruising needs is, of course, a very personal matter. If you're in the budget cruising category, you may take some ideas from our frugal cruising advocates, Jill and Rudy Sachet, about what they thought in choosing their own dinghy and setting it up.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of discussion on dinghies, and it's interesting to hear everybody's thoughts. Well, our premise is, first of all, we don't have to go fast, we just have to go. And we choose a hard dinghy to avoid the back-of-the-mind concern or anxiety of coming back to the dinghy and having it deflated or hold. Plus, we chose a sailing dinghy so that it's easier to row. As far as equipment goes, you need the correct nav lights, an anchor in road, oars or paddles. Well, here in Florida anyways, you need your registration or a copy of it on board, and you need a horn or a whistle, your personal flotation devices, and we find a bailer helpful. For those with inflatables, they want to consider having a patch kit and a pump. For an outboard, we carry a spare impeller, shear pin, cotter pins, spark plug, and a spare prop. And of course, any tools needed depends on the spares and the type of engine you have and what kind of repairs you're going to make when you're away from the mother boat. We carry a small pair of pliers, spark plug wrench. We have a two-stroke, two-cycle engine. It's a 2-horse. We wanted twin ones, but we couldn't find any, so we settled for a 2-horse engine. But the biggest problem that we find, and it happens not too often, is we don't concern ourselves with whether we're using regular gasoline or ethanol free, because it just doesn't seem to matter on a 2-stroke engine. We've been told that the oil you add to the gas negates any of those problems. But when our engine doesn't start on the first or second pull, what we do is we drain the fuel bowl, and then it usually starts right up. At the very worst, we might also have to pull the plug and clean or dry it. So we don't really concern ourselves with additives to the gas or what type of fuel we get. 4-stroke engines seem to be a little more sensitive to that.
And as you all know, we like to end an episode with something a little bit inspirational. Here, Almut Otterstedt had a surprising response when asked, "Has cruising lived up to your expectations?" Let's listen to Almut.
I got much more than I ever have expected. Just, I can say is watch episode 8 of Circumnavigators Summit.
Thank you, Almut, for reminding us about the SSCA Circumnavigators Summit. And if listeners want to revisit and listen again to not just your episode 8, but all the other episodes of the Circumnavigators who spoke in this safety and security episode, be sure to visit the SSCA website. So we hope you enjoyed this episode and learned some safety and security ideas to use on your own in this first segment. Next episode, we'll be back talking about the last 2 areas of safety and security ideas: non-lethal defense strategies and actual incidents that happen to members remember, fly your birdies and swallowtails and invite others to join SSCA to benefit from sharing knowledge, ideas, personal friendships, and getting access to all the great stuff we present in the Easier and Safer Cruising Summit. Talk to you next time. We hope you enjoyed listening to our guests and took away some new ideas for yourselves. If you have something to say about any subject you heard, it's not too late to join in. Be sure to check out the preview of our next episode. Comment and subscribe on SSCA YouTube channel. Share this video on your social media. And join the camaraderie by participating in our coming new episodes. If you're not a member yet, visit ssca.org to get in on the conversation and gain full access to the SSCA Easier and Safer Cruising Summit.